Hello, everybody, and welcome to the New Stack Makers. My name's Kiran Oliver, and I'm the podcast producer here at the New Stack. And today I am joined by the lovely Liz Rice, Technology Evangelist over at Aqua Security, and Ashley McNamara, Director of Open Source Initiatives at Microsoft, and Cheryl Hong, Director of Ecosystem at CNCF. Today we're going to be talking about leadership in open source, and we're going to get right into it and start with the basics. How did you get started in open source?
Well, for me, I was a developer, for a long part of my career doing not open source software. And at some point, more and more things were particularly in the sort of infrastructure world, distributed system world, were being done open source. And it just seemed like a natural progression. I don't really remember ever making a conscious decision. And suddenly, like, everything I was doing pretty much was in the open.
So I actually started in open source. I was contributing docs to OpenStack and OpenShift, and I wanted to contribute more, so I learned Python so that I could do that, and I have not left open source.
So like Liz, I started out as a developer, not in open source. Actually, KubeCon was a big reason that I got into open source, because I came to KubeCon as a diversity scholar, and then got into all the events, got into community and speaking and doing more of that. And that's how I've ended up.
Yeah, I just made my first contribution to Kubernetes, actually. I made a blog post for them about the diversity luncheon. So that was my first foray into open source. I did that a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, amazing.
Thank you.
Very cool.
Are there any ongoing issues that you've seen crop up in the community over the last couple of years? Is there anything that you'd like to see, focused on more or focused on less, for that matter?
Good question. The giant elephant in the room when we talk about open source is kind of business model and remuneration, and particularly in the sort of community we're part of here at KubeCon, this all kind of works because of companies who sponsor a lot of the work. They employ people. My salary is paid for by a company, and I think that's true for a lot of people. And there is this sort of idealistic view of being able to just contribute to open source and magically money will come from somewhere. And it is more complicated and difficult than that.
It is very much the philosophy of the Linux Foundation, of which the CNCF is a part, that companies need to play their part in sustaining open source, because we can't rely on people in their evenings and weekends and in their free time to do it. But then you do end up with a bit of tension between those who care about the individual developers versus the corporate interests.
That's true. And what do you feel makes a good leader in today's open source community? What are the qualities that someone that's going into leadership should embody? Is there anything that you think they should focus on?
For me, on my team, I focus a lot on upstream contributions. Microsoft has not always had the best reputation in open source. So on my team, we have a focus on contributing without an agenda. Lots of large companies contribute with an agenda, so I think that that's important.
Absolutely, that's very true.
What was the question?
The question was, what do you feel makes a good leader in today's open source community?
I think communication skills are so vital, because this is a global community, and you need to be able to reach out to people who are from very different walks of life, doing very different things in different companies, and be able to have that empathy and understanding with what people really need and want.
That is the best answer.
Absolutely. And we have actually just been joined by Leah Petersen, who's an engineer over at 2 Sigma. Thank you very much. We're so happy to see you.
Hi, I'm excited to be here. I was late because I was helping out the diversity luncheon hack,
Absolutely.
which was a great success.
Awesome.
Wonderful. All right. Next up, I was actually wondering what some things that you'd like to see, for those that are interested in those leadership roles, what do you think they can do to help bolster their skills?
Expand on that a little bit.
For example, if you're just a software developer that wants to get into a leadership track in the open source community, what sort of skill set should you focus on? What skills should you pick up that will make that path easier for you in some way?
Can we double down on communication?
I would have said the same thing, yeah. Yeah, because at some point you have to spread your impact beyond what you can do as an individual. And in open source, part of that is communication, and part of that is being willing to put yourself out there and say, I can do this I want to put my effort and my time into making this happen. And it is a long process. You have to show some sustained contributions over time for people to really trust that you have the best intentions of the community at heart, and you're not just sort of someone trying to jump in at the last minute and go, I want to be a leader. What can I do?
Yes.
I think there's also a very distinct difference between sort of leadership in kind of corporations and leadership in the community, because for the former, you get a kind of, a stamp of authority, and you basically can say, I'm the boss of you. And that just isn't true when you are in a community like an open source community, and it becomes much more collaborative, and, leading is almost leading by example rather than anything more kind of, you have to establish your own credibility, and people will respect you for the things that you do, not for the role that you have.
Right.
Absolutely. And you always have the feedback too. There's a constant feedback chain. You're not just making the decision and that's it. That is the ultimate decision. It's final, no questions. You always have feedback from somewhere as a leader in an open source community.
Yeah,
So,
it's always collaborative. It should always be collaborative.
absolutely.
I work with a lot of end users within the CNCF, and some companies who are new to open source will say, I want to get a feature in the next 6 months. Can you just make it happen? You're like, no, not really. I mean, all the projects are self-governing. If you want to have something done, you have to kind of go in there and put your time and do it yourself. There's no central authority that you can appeal to and be like, can you tell me, am I doing the right thing? Or how do I fix this problem? Or how do I get my feature into the next release? It just doesn't exist. And
That's
that
my
is really a
biggest
big change.
Pet peeve.
It's a very different model to corporate. There's a company, a vendor that you can purchase support from. None of that exists within open source.
I'm going to actually go for this one question that I wanted to ask. Do you feel that leader is an overused title when it applies to those in positions of privilege in the open source community?
I think maybe the first impression is when you say, this person is a leader in the community versus this person is a leader in a corporate hierarchy, that gives it perhaps the wrong, very different impression. So I don't think it's a bad term, because
No.
I do think that leaders, just like leaders idealistically in a big company, should be able to have a broad impact and also have the depth of technical expertise, and have enough kudos within the community that people can trust them and trust their word. So I don't think it's a bad term, but perhaps the first impression is not the same.
How do you think the community can work toward improving that pipeline for those underrepresented minorities in tech to get to those leadership positions? What do you think can be done better, and how can underrepresented minorities make their claim not necessarily stronger, but I guess the word is basically what can they do to help themselves, and what can the community do to help serve them better to get them to those positions?
How was the diversity luncheon?
Yeah, I do think that we tackled a lot of these topics. There were a lot of roundtable discussion, also hands-on Kubernetes help, and pair programming. So I think those initiatives where you can go and connect with a small group of people who have similar experience to you, and you can feel like you can reach out to them in the future. And then also, I know a lot of the pair programming specifically, they were helping directly, like, how do you get started contributing to Kubernetes? What are your personal blockers? And let's work through them. And it was a learning together experience. And I think, I do hope that some blockers were lifted, or people kind of saw their way forward. And if not, connected with people who hopefully could help them in the future.
Yeah, contributing is one part that you can do on your own with enough initiative. But I think that the other part is having leads who are mostly white men be ambassadors for underrepresented people.
So I looked into a survey that GitHub did in 2017 of contributors in open source projects, and they split it out by men and women, and a couple of the answers kind of fascinated me. So both men and women were equally likely to say they were interested in contributing to open source. But when they asked people, okay, the last time that you got some help, where did that help come from? And the answers were, I asked in a public forum, like a mailing list, or I got help from somebody I knew, or I got unsolicited help, or other. And what they found was women were half as likely to report that they used a public forum, and half as likely to report that they received unsolicited help.
And not even mansplaining.
I don't know, is that help? But, I perhaps could have guessed that women, maybe not as willing to put themselves out there in this public forum, but being half as likely to report unsolicited help, that kind of surprised me. And that's something that the community as a whole need to get better at, and reaching out to bring in these underrepresented groups.
I definitely agree, and I think there's a conversation between mentorship versus sponsorship.
Absolutely.
And that kind of, who do you have access to, and what agency and what cultural capital do they have in the community to give you the confidence to say, look, here's an issue. If you work on this, I am going to help you and advocate for you, and I have the power to make sure that gets merged. And I think having access to people like that is critical. And I think that the social dynamic there is that people in these positions of power are going to look at people and say, this person has potential. And why do they think that? They think that because that person reminds them of themselves. And so they're going to take a chance, take a risk, put themselves out there for someone who they identify with. And unfortunately, we don't have enough diversity up there to pull diversity up and help new people get their foot in the door.
I do think, and this doesn't just apply to open source, but that we are learning more about things like unconscious bias. And I think a lot of people are recognizing that, perhaps they had privileges that they didn't realize they had, and that perhaps that kind of means they should put more effort into finding people who maybe don't have that privilege and sharing some of that with them and helping them and advocating for them. So the fact that we're starting to recognize that, and the more allies, the more advocacy that happens, it's got to be a good thing.
Absolutely.
And I think the CNCF has actually done a good job of this. It's pushed for more female speakers and speakers from underrepresented groups. It's put a lot of money into the diversity scholarships to bring people from underrepresented groups to KubeCon. And these are long-term initiatives, so they're not going to pay off in 6 months. But the goal is that within a year, 2 years, we'll really see the impact.
Absolutely.
And you do see the difference, just as a sort of at an anecdotal level. You come to a conference like this, and there is a more diverse crowd. It's than perhaps some more corporate events.
Absolutely. And pro tip, I do this. I get asked to speak at conferences all the time. You see the same speakers year after year after year. How many times do I need to speak at the same conference? So I will pass that opportunity off to somebody else in an underrepresented group so that they have an opportunity to have the stage.
That's awesome.
That's amazing.
Yeah, definitely. And I also can say from personal experience, I'm new to tech. So I got into tech through a boot camp about 4 years ago. And I became involved in Kubernetes right from the beginning. And I do feel like it's been so inspiring and encouraging for me in my career. And I really think that the diversity scholarship program, KubeCon, the CNCF, have been pivotal in my career advancement in general.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I found that when I was submitting my PR for the blog post for the diversity luncheon, it was really helpful for me because I actually have a really severe learning disability. Once I hit a certain point when it comes to programming, I can't do it anymore. JavaScript, algebra, no, it doesn't work for me. So I had to have a lot more help than everybody else. But they really came through for me, and they really helped me out, and they made sure that my PR got merged, and it was really nice to have that support. And I know that it's like now I get to say I'm a contributor to open source. And that's neat, because I would have never had that opportunity before. So it was really nice to have that.
I think it's really quite a recent development that people are recognizing, contributions don't have to just be code, and there
Yes.
are all sorts of other ways that people, I think you did a really good talk about that.
I talk about it all the time.
Yes. Yeah. And, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's important that you don't have to just program. You can blog, you can write, you can help people in so many different ways.
You can draw amazing gophers.
Absolutely, you can draw gophers.
You could draw gophers. Open source projects are a business at the end of the day, and they need all kinds of business help from all kinds of people.
And what are some pieces of advice that you give to people in open source that are interested in getting those more in-depth roles in the community? What sort of tidbits would you give them?
Be consistent as you contribute. Pick a project that you like and be consistent.
That is true. Don't just have one sparse contribution here and there. Just try and do whatever your goal is, once a month or once a week or something like that. All right, and that was about all I had, so I would love to thank you for joining us, and I really appreciate it. And we're live here from KubeCon, and we'll see you later on today.
Thank you.
Thank you.